Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's joined us tonight. This is Leveraging LinkedIn for Success, hosted by Ignite, and brought to you personally by myself. I'm Whitney Thomas. I'm the Alumni Network Manager, and our Alumni Ambassador, Cecilia Silva. And if you've been following the Ignite Alumni Network at all, you know that we are doing a lot of programming around career in conjunction with our coach programming and focusing a lot on building out your LinkedIn profile because, as you know, LinkedIn is the platform where people talk about jobs and look for jobs and post their resume. So it's really important, and we want to help you make the best of your profile. So this is the first webinar in a series that we have coming up. And this is going to be your basics of building out your profile and getting the most bang for your buck, making sure that the stuff that you have on your profile is an accurate representation of who you are and the experiences that you have. So I just want to thank you and let you know that you're in great hands. Cecilia Silva is fantastic. She's an amazing ambassador for Ignite, and she knows a lot about LinkedIn. She's an avid user. So without further ado, I will get over to her and let her take the wheel. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Cecilia.
So thank you so much, Whitney, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you to everyone who is here right now and tuning in, and thank you to those of you who are watching on YouTube. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. Like Whitney mentioned, I use LinkedIn a lot, and then I also attended the conference in DC where I was in a workshop for LinkedIn, so I was able to kind of pull a lot of that and adjust a lot of the LinkedIn stuff that I had been preaching previously. And I've also given similar presentations on LinkedIn at the coach events here in the Dallas Fort Worth area. So I'm really excited to be able to share this information with everyone and hope that you can all utilize LinkedIn as the wonderful resource it's supposed to be. So just to get started, we have like a little true or false question. Feel free to just type in your answer in the little chat section. So true or false, posts from Facebook, Snapchat, or Twitter can easily provide the content for your LinkedIn profile. Give it 1 or 2 seconds. Ready? And we'll just move on. So, false. Obviously, LinkedIn is supposed to be strictly professional. So, the content that you are using needs to be specifically for a professional atmosphere, whereas on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, it's more laid back and casual. So, the content cannot be transferable to this area, unfortunately. So, next true or false question. A nice selfie will suffice for a LinkedIn profile picture. Again, 1 or 2 seconds. And false. So you always want to use a professional headshot for your LinkedIn profile picture. And you also want to make sure that it is in guidelines of the dimensions that LinkedIn recommends, just so that way it's not like awkwardly cutting off half of your forehead or half of your wonderful smile. You want to make sure that they're getting a nice, clear picture of who you are, so that way if they pull you in for an interview afterwards, they can know what you look like based on being able to reference your LinkedIn from previous times. You also want to use this as a chance to convey like your personal brand. And so you want to make sure that if jobs want someone who is willing to dress professionally, that you're dressed professionally in your LinkedIn profile picture. Now, if you're in a more casual career setting like public relations where you're able to dress more casually, then that would be the brand that you're going for. So just make sure to kind of like adjust it for the career that you're going into and being able to present yourself as a ideal model of what the employee they want should look like. So that brings us into the first step, displaying your brand. So, branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And this is from Jeff Bezos, who's the Amazon founder and CEO. And it's a really great way of being able to kind of like figure out where you want to start with how you brand yourself. So, what do you want professional contacts to know about you? Do you want them to associate a certain way that you dress? So, for example, with Hillary Clinton, pantsuits, that is her personal brand. That is something that she always is known for and something that people will associate with her and her how professional she is in different settings. So your LinkedIn presence should always kind of mirror the way you would want to present yourself in a real life setting. So that way, whenever people see you in person, they're able to recognize you and kind of like link together your LinkedIn. Use a professional headshot. And so always be sure to use some sort of professional picture that is focused on yourself and yourself only. If you don't have the funds or anything, the newer iPhones and like Samsungs take really good portrait mode photos. So you can use that as a great way of kind of getting your headshot taken. And that will also be like a nice way of being able to change out based on what jobs you're applying to. But if you attend Ignite events, you have the opportunity of getting your professional headshot taken sometimes. So always take advantage of those resources that Ignite has to offer so that way you can go ahead and supplement and upgrade your LinkedIn profile. So it's not too late to erase. No matter the day or the time that you are applying to something, if there is any sort of content that you feel questions your personal branding or character to an employer, delete it. Like, even if you do it right now while we are on this webinar, if you find something that even raises a question mark or a yellow flag, not so much of a red one, feel free to delete it. Employers like to look at social media oftentimes before they schedule interviews. So you're going to want to make sure that you're kind of like being professional at all times. And as you grow as young individuals and young professionals in the real world, you'll realize that certain things that you thought were okay were not okay now. So you can always adjust and kind of delete stuff no matter the time frame or no matter whether or not you feel like it would be awkward. The next step is maximizing your headline. So I used to struggle a lot with this, but basically your headline is like the most valuable piece on your LinkedIn profile picture because whenever someone searches your name, your headline pops up underneath your name. So that's the first thing that people are going to associate, your picture and your headline. And headline should kind of read similar to a newspaper headline to where it's mostly about you and like the branding that you have for yourself, not so much of like your current job title. So you have to be really careful whenever you're updating your job references and your career goals in the experience section because it'll automatically populate that title as your headline. And so you want to make sure that your headline is concurrent to your branding and not so much of like what current position you have. You also want to go ahead and convert your URL from a generic to a personal one, so that way it's easier to share. You know, it's easier to share linkedin.com/Cecilia Silva 1 versus 178652234. You're never going to get those numbers right, and people won't either, so you might as well just kind of make it more personal. And it's okay if it includes one or two numbers at the end, as long as it has like your name or the way that you want to convey yourself in a professional setting. A good way to kind of like think about what your headline should be is thinking about good titles for your autobiography. So if there's something that you feel like really describes who you are and your work ethic or your history of like what you are passionate about, then that's a good way of kind of like deciding on what your headline should be. And then your headline shouldn't be extremely long. You want it to fit within one line underneath your name whenever you're searching, so that way people will just automatically see it and want to click on you to know more. So the next one is personalizing your summary. So you want to write in first person. This will be one of the multiple ways that LinkedIn differs from your resume writing. Usually when you're writing your resumes, you'll do third person narrative, so that way it's talking about the task that you've done. Well, in your summary, you want to concentrate on it being in first person, so you're talking honestly and bragging about your accomplishments, your strengths, and your career goals. So you always want to be very humble, but also like confident in who you are as a professional. Employers want to know that you know what you're doing and that you're an ideal vision of what they want an employee to be. So be specific and direct in your summary. Don't use that resume language or like fancy words that you wouldn't use on a one-to-one basis. This tends to kind of like make people think that those are the daily words that you would use in your vocabulary when they interact with you. And then if they interact with you in real life, they're going to see that it contradicts your summary. So your summary should be, true to yourself, to your branding, and to your accomplishments, but also like more of a conversational first person one on one kind of way of doing so. Additionally, in your personal summary area, be sure to list your contact information. So, your phone number, social media accounts, if they're professional, your website and blog URLs, if you have those. Um, I recently found out through Whitney actually that you can go to Google Phone and it will populate a phone number for you. So that way you don't have to list your personal phone number on LinkedIn and it'll just forward the calls to your actual cell phone. So you won't have to worry about sharing or oversharing, but you'll also be easily accessible to those who are wanting to reach out to you on LinkedIn because they were impressed by your resume or by your profile and want to connect. So, step 4 is experience listing. Um, you want to make sure that you list your former and current jobs. So, always keep this section updated. As soon as you are given a new position or as soon as you move up, be sure to update your title. And there's been a few LinkedIn updates in the past over the summer, and so it will now put all of your job positions that you've held at one company in order in like this timeline for someone to see how you've grown. So really take advantage of that by constantly updating if you're moving up the ladder. So that way it shows that you're progressing throughout the career or throughout the company that you're currently working in and you're ready to kind of like continue. Don't be as detailed as you would on a resume. There's two different ways to kind of like list your experience. So there's one where you talk about how that's made you a better professional and how it's taught you transferable skills. And then the second one is to just leave it blank because if it's too much like your resume, employers won't look at your resume. And so they should be differentiating what a resume is from your LinkedIn profile. So you don't want them to kind of like be switching in together. You want them to be two different ways that they can learn more about you. List your most important contributions and or responsibilities. So whenever you list your experience on LinkedIn, you can not only add the different positions that you've held within that company or within that university or whatever the institution may be, you can also list the different contributions that you've had. So you can have links to articles where they were talking about your work. You can upload journals that you might have written or you can upload photographs of you being recognized at different places. This is a really great tool that you should be using and that I definitely encourage you to use, especially when there's that link to URL kind of area. You can actually hit paste a link right there and it will send that person who's viewing your profile to a website where you can talk about your work. So you can incorporate your blog or you can incorporate the fact that you were published in a certain database. So always make sure that you're kind of listing all of these. Now, everyone always wonders whether or not they should include those tasks they had when they were 16, 17, or even 18. And so it just kind of is a personal reference. Payless Shoes Clerk 2008. Like, should I list that? Should I not? On one pro is that, it says that I've been working since 2008. I have a very strong work ethic and I'm dedicated to learning about different things. And I also don't think I'm better than anyone because I had one of those menial jobs at 16. And then on the other hand, it's just not relevant to the career that you're going into now. You're not wanting to go into Payless Shoes and build an enterprise in that corporation. You're wanting to go into politics or law or the medical field or public relations. Like, if Payless Shoes or Barnes& and Noble or Target isn't relevant to the career that you want, then I would discourage you from listing it because you don't want them to identify you with the jobs that you had at 16. You want them to identify you with the jobs that you have now and how that's helped you kind of reach your career goals and milestones. So the next step is endorsements and recommendations. Endorsements and recommendations are my favorite part of LinkedIn. And the reason for that is because they are so important to being able to kind of like speak on who you are and also the connections that you have with other people. So the first thing I always do after I connect with someone on LinkedIn is I will go down to their skills and I will endorse them or recommend them on certain skills. But you also want to be honest about this. So don't put that you work with someone personally on every task and you can speak highly of different skills if you've only met them once in person. Because you want it to be something to where you can interact with them later on in the future. And then after they've interacted with you, they can talk about or they can endorse you or recommend you on LinkedIn honestly about a project that you were both in collaboration on. So this is basically LinkedIn's version of like checking your references like you would on a resume. And just like I mentioned, you can always connect with someone. And if you've worked previously before, then just go straight into endorsing and recommending each other. Or if you're waiting until you've gotten to interact with them and you've gotten to work with them on a one-on-one basis, then don't just wait for them to have time go by afterwards. Ask them right away or go to their LinkedIn as soon as you're done, like with that project or task, and endorse them or ask them for recommendations. So that way it's honest, it's in the now because they're just now experiencing it and they can talk more in detail about what you've done in with them and what stood out about you. And it's just kind of like a great way of making sure that you're always having honest opinions that speak highly of your work patterns. And then only ask for recommendations from people you have past experience with. You, like I mentioned before, want these to be extremely honest and you want them to be able to say that, yes, I worked with this person personally and that they were amazing at organizing or amazing at speaking in front of a crowd or that they were able to be very dependable so that way we could get the job done. One thing that you will do is you'll often connect with people before conferences, but then you won't endorse them until afterwards when you've had a chance to experience a workshop environment with them or you've had a chance to kind of like get to know them on a one-on-one basis if you're in that same kind of group. So just be sure to keep this very authentic, very honest, and also don't be afraid to ask for recommendations because this is one of the best tools that LinkedIn has to offer you. Step 6 is your engagement. So oftentimes people will think that LinkedIn is just kind of there as a sitting reference, that there's no way of kind of like being on it or actively engaging with other people. And this is not the truth. So who you are connected with is more important than how many people you're connected with. And this differs from other types of social media platforms like Facebook in many ways. So on LinkedIn, if you have 500 plus connections, but you're not actively engaging with people, you can't really take advantage of everything LinkedIn has to offer. But if you have like 50 or 100 very like honest connections where they have also engaged with you and praised your work, endorsed you, recommended you for certain things, then that's kind of like where you want to start to choose, your quality over your quantity. On Facebook, you have thousands of friends, but they can't all speak about your character or about who you are as a professional. And so, LinkedIn, you want to make sure that everyone you're connected with can reference who you are as a professional and your career goals and milestones that you might have reached while engaging with them. So some ways to engage is, sharing articles about your industry or about the industry that other people are in. This gives you like some sort of conversation to have with them about what their opinion is or what their stance on certain issues are. Always comment on other people's posts. So whenever they update their career goals or their current job description or headline, be sure to comment on it and kind of like encourage them or congratulate them for that new position and just provide like some good kind of references in the comments as well. So you can say, congratulations on your new job. Your work ethic has proved that you are able to move up, and I look forward to seeing what you do in the future. So, those kinds of things can speak really highly about who you are because you've taken time out of your day to kind of comment on someone's career change. And then provide endorsements and recommendations at this time. That is the next best way to engage with people. And then most of the time, you'll see that those recommendations and the more authentic they are, the more people are willing to engage with you on LinkedIn, especially if it's someone that has few connections, then they feel like you're more easily approachable, or if there are a lot of connections that that person has, or if it's a professional who is an expert in their field, then they're going to think very highly of you for having that endorsement. So the next step is the final and most important one. You want to list Ignite. So there are two options for kind of listing Ignite. So the first one would be experience. So listed in your experience. You have interacted with Ignite, you've gone through as a college chapter president, as an alumni member, or an alumni ambassador. You want to make sure that you're able to kind of reference the different ways that you moved through the Ignite National um, organization. And so it might have been you started off in 2008 as a high school chapter member, and then in 2012 you were president of your high school chapter, and then whenever you went to college you were a chapter member, and then you were president, and so on and so on. So Ignite is a great way of kind of like referencing that you as a professional are already aware of what career goals you have and what skills you have been taught. The next one is under like your certifications. So Ignite offers lots of opportunities for you to learn more about different resources. So for example, LinkedIn. There will be many opportunities where you attend different conferences and there are professionals who are there offering you this information that you would normally have to pay for, but at no cost. And so you could definitely list Ignite in your certifications area and just list the different concentrations that you've undergone workshops in. The final step is, connecting with Ignite National and its wonderful staff. So these are the people who can speak more credibly to the different type of person you are as a professional, as a personal human being, and are very authentic and very willing to be able to endorse you on who you are because they interact with you for so long. And even if it's not someone that you know in real life, it's someone that you've interacted with on social media because we do have a large national, organization and network. And so I'm sure Whitney and I can recognize some names even though we might have never met in person. And we can speak about different things you've posted on in the Facebook group or different ways that you have kind of like been there and supported like the webinars or you've gone to different events. And so just always connect with the Ignite National staff because these are the professionals who are leading in the field that they are working in and can speak to your skills that you have and the skills that they want you to continue growing in. So finally, feel free to reach out to us. Whitney and I are more than happy to answer any questions, and we would love to be able to get your opinions on different issues that you might have with LinkedIn or different things that you feel like we might have not touched on right now. LinkedIn is a great resource for you to be using, so just make sure that you're using it because oftentimes it'll just sit there and people will forget about it. And employers definitely use it as a resource. They are, with how fast the world is changing and technology is being used to their advantage, LinkedIn is definitely something that they're checking for references. And so you want to make sure that your LinkedIn is as polished as could possibly be. So I think that's it for me. I don't know if Whitney wanted to add anything. Whitney?
Yeah, so this has been fantastic. Cecilia, you are definitely a LinkedIn expert. And if you scroll up through the chat box, when you were talking about headlines, I copy and pasted yours from LinkedIn because I think that you've really mastered this idea of speaking to who you are as a person and what you're all day to day professional life. And yours is Cecilia Silva, advocate on campus, helping students voice their concerns. And I think that if you could add another line, you could add like, empowering women into politics all over the country. But just in the one line that you have, I think it really highlights the majority of the work that you do. And you've really distilled that down into a headline that speaks to who you are. So I wanted to share that as an example. Um, and I have had so many personal conversations with Ignite alumni for hours at a time, back and forth about, is this headline right? Does this describe me? Is this accurate? Um, and I think that it's something you have to play around with. It can be ongoing. You can change it as you see fit. But I would just urge everyone to brag about themselves. What would you title of your autobiography to be? Um, and certainly, if you're thinking about that in terms of your accomplishments, you want to brag about that. This is the place to do that. And Cecilia, I think you've done a great job with that. Um, and headlines are something that I know both of us could be reached for consultation to talk about. Another thing I wanted to point out, we have the chat box going for questions if anybody is interested in posing a question. But in the meantime, I'm going to just revisit the piece about Google Voice. So on one of the slides, we talked about listing your personal contact information on LinkedIn. And I think that's critical. You want to make sure that your contact information is available when people do want to get in contact with you about a job or about community work. You want to, not everyone has the premium version of LinkedIn where it will provide that information. So you want to make sure it's in your profile. And I do encourage about LinkedIn says you should include a phone number. However, for anonymity and for safety, I think that you should not use your personal phone number because it is out on the internet. It is personal, it's public. And so Google Voice is what I would ask if you want to list a phone number. I included the link in the chat box. It's just voice.google.com. And when you log on there, it will take your personal information, your actual phone number, and then it will generate an additional phone number which you can dial, and it'll ring your cell phone or it'll ring whatever phone you list. Um, and a lot of people use that not only on LinkedIn, but in the signature of their email, just because they need to have a phone number out there and available to the people they serve, but they don't want to use their personal or reveal their personal cell phone number. So I would highly encourage that. Um, and then, Cecilia, I had a question for you about when you were talking about Payless shoes. And I know that's an example for me. That would be, do I list Finish Line? When I sold shoes in high school, I sold a lot of shoes and I was great at it, but I don't list it on my LinkedIn because it's not it's not important to who I am today as a professional. But a lot of people that might be watching this are just out of high school or still in high school or even still just in college, and they don't have a ton of past career experience. So if they don't want to list things like finish line or Payless shoes, um, would it be, what are your recommendations? And then would it be beneficial to go heavier on the volunteer experience and the extracurriculars that you do, just to kind of supplement your profile so that it looks full and robust, but you don't have to mention these jobs that don't lead to who you are as a professional? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So for those who don't really have much like work paid experience, then you really want to stress on that volunteer experience. But also keep in mind that your volunteer experience is like community service or like volunteering for different organizations. And then in your experience, you can still list like the extracurriculars that you were involved with. So, for example, if you were in National Honor Society at your school or high school, you can definitely list that under your experience, especially if you took on executive role or even if you were just a member, because that requires a lot of work academically. And then you can also list different things like the Best Buddies organization. People love seeing like different extracurriculars that you were involved with in high school that are associated with national movements that are extremely important. And so it shows that you're well rounded, that you have the time to where you're dedicated, and so you may not have like a certain paid work experience, but you are a hardworking individual. Um, I used to previously only have like one job experience, and it was the legal assistant, and I thought it just looked so bad because it was the only thing I had, and I was like 20 years old. And so I started to kind of like supplement it by adding, my educational experience. So I added my degree plan for my current bachelor's, then I added my degree plan for the associates that I completed, and I also added my high school diploma, just so that way I could also reach more connections through different people that I went to high school with. And then in my volunteer experience, I talked about volunteering at different law firms, at my church, volunteering with my grandparents' organization, and I put that I would volunteer as a missionary with my grandparents. And so it was just kind of like a way of me compensating in different areas where I wasn't able to compensate in the work experience. So the next one is in your accomplishments. That is one where you're able to list all of those honor awards that you might have received in high school. So you can put that you excelled in a speech and debate tournament, or that you were given recognition in your theater club because you were an outstanding speaker, or you can talk about an award that you were given for mathletes or different things like that. And you can list all of the organizations that you were involved with too. And so on these, you also want to be, honest about what organizations you were involved with. And so if you went to one meeting and then didn't really participate in the activities, I wouldn't list it because sometimes employers will approach you because they see something on your LinkedIn as an accomplishment in your organizations that you're involved with, and then reference something that that organization does. So about 6 months ago, I had a grassroots organizer reach out to me for having that I'm a part of the National Latin Honor Society and talk to me about Latin courses in high school. And so I was able to speak honestly about my experiences there. And he was kind of using it as a fishing tool, and he even told me this to see if I actually took Latin because it is a dead language, and oftentimes people will pretend that they took a certain course to sound more intelligent or to kind of like bump up their resume. So be honest. People want to know that you're being authentic on LinkedIn. If you want to kind of like twist the truth a little bit, maybe your resume would be a better area to do that. You can speak more in detail about all of the tasks that you did where you might have really not have done that. But overall, both platforms should be very honest and speak highly about who you are as an individual. So if you don't have much work experience, you can list those like you worked at Payless or at Finish Line, but you also want to go ahead and compensate by utilizing the other parts that LinkedIn has to offer. So in your personal summary, you can talk in, you're recommended to write paragraphs here, let me remind you. So you can talk about the fact that you've only held one prior job experience, but that you've excelled in your community service, or you've excelled academically in high school, or that you are really ready to be given the opportunity to excel in your career goals, or get started on making your career goals happen. And so that's a great way for you to kind of like also make up for the fact that you don't really have much experience, but you can speak very highly and honestly about yourself in your personal summary. So definitely use that to your advantage. If you look up the LinkedIn CEO and founder Jeff Weiner, um, you can see that he has like paragraphs in his personal summary, which is funny because we don't really need to know much about him. I think he's doing pretty great career wise, but he's able to speak about what he's done, and how he feels that benefits him as a professional and where he hopes to go in the future. And so that's a great example to kind of use, and you really want to utilize the different things that LinkedIn offers you so that way your current work experience doesn't really look like it's empty. Especially if you don't even have anything to list, at least people will see that you're educated, that you're volunteering a lot. And we also understand that right now there is a large influx, and there has been in the past, for unpaid internships and unpaid community service experiences. And so those are just as valuable as those paid experiences, because people are able to see that you're so dedicated to succeeding that you're willing to take on those unpaid positions. It speaks very highly of your character and very highly of like how willing you are to be the professional you want to be. But that was a great question, Whitney. I hope I answered that in the little ramble that I went off on.
You did, and I had a kind of follow-up question to that. This is a question I get asked a lot when coaching folks about resumes, um, because there's this theory related to resumes that experienced professionals have a one-page resume, that college students are more likely to submit like a 3 to 4 page resume that lists out every single accomplishment, every single club that they were part of in college, and kind of the trend of the coaches is that they encourage the participants to limit their resume to one page. If it can't be said in one page, um, it probably is gratuitous, and the person that's reading it is not going to read your resume beyond one page anyway. So I wanted to know, in relation to LinkedIn, when do you think that you should start removing the listings that, like things like that, like the Republican club on your campus? Like, when should that be removed as an experiential listing, and maybe just bump down to like associations and affiliations?
So that's another great question. Oftentimes you want to keep those. You're really proud of those accomplishments and different things. So, like for example, my resume, I had so much experience that it bubbled up until the back page because I was just so proud of all of my speech and debate accomplishments. I wanted those listed. I worked hard for them. I did not want to let them go. And then as you kind of like grow as an individual and young professional, you start to realize that they speak highly about who you were, but not who you are now. And so it's great that in 2014 I did really well in speech and debate, but here in who I am now in 2018 has kind of moved past that. So speech and debate is now an honor society that I was associated with, but it's no longer like an award or experience that I list. So I don't still say that I was president of my speech and debate team. I just have it under the organizations that I was, inducted in and am a long time member for. And so you just kind of have to use like your best sort of judgment. You know yourself better than anyone else, so you can speak honestly about whether or not something is still relevant to who you are wanting to be as a professional. And so you want to kind of like bump it down, so that way it's not the first thing people see about you, and that they start to like, use that as a reference of who you are as a professional. So you're always going to want them to look at your LinkedIn profile and scroll down and see like your experience right away as your most recent and what is actually relevant to who you're trying to grow into as a person. So unfortunately for me, that did not mean including that I was president of my speech and debate team, but it did mean that I could keep that as a membership that I will always be a part of. I still get those emails from that organization and I still go and volunteer with them. So that's also another way to stay involved and keep those connections fresh and relevant. If you want to continue your involvement with an organization beyond the member that you were in high school or college, that's great. And if anything, that speaks very highly about how dedicated you are to that organization. And I would definitely encourage you to do so, because oftentimes that shows that wherever you may go in life, you're always going to consider the work that you do important, and that you're willing to come back to help grow the company beyond you moving past it. So just kind of use your best judgment, but make sure that you keep it like clear and concise. And so I would just kind of stick to the timeline of like who you are now is different from who you are in a year. And who I am now is different than who I was in a year. I've grown a lot as an individual and as a professional. And so a lot of the experience I have is from the past year. Now, if you are in the middle of your career, then it might be different for you. It might be that 5 years ago is different than who you are now. So you want to keep your stuff within that time frame. If you've been at the same company for 5 years, you want to make sure that that's kind of like where most of your focus is, how you've moved up within that company, and not so much about the experience you might have had beforehand, because that's no longer relevant to how you're trying to continue moving up in that company that you are with now, or where you're trying to go in the future. So, for now, as young individuals, I would say probably within a year or two at most, you want to start to kind of like bump things down as no longer relevant. And then you can still list them as, different accomplishments that you might have had, where it lists like your organizations and affiliations, and not so much of like the experience that you have.
That's a great response. I think that, as you mentioned, it's just like a judgment call. And as you add things to your profile, and as your experience grows, you want to adjust where you place your listings and entries. Um, so, on a final note, I wanted to mention that when we were talking about connecting with people and having strategic connections on LinkedIn, um, I would suggest any of these conferences that you're going to, seminars, professional experiences, if you connect with somebody, even if it's just an exchange of a business card or an introduction, I would reach out to them on LinkedIn, because as your connections, as you start connecting with people, your network is going to grow, and that just, increases the usefulness of LinkedIn for you as a professional. But the one thing I would suggest about that is that you send a personal note. And when you click connect with someone, it's going to give you that option to send a personal note, and it will generate a message for you that says like, "Hi, I want to connect." Um, Erase that, that's pointless, and include something about, I just met you on the LinkedIn webinar with Ignite. I would love to connect with you. Make it personal because it is highly likely that the people you want to connect with strategically on LinkedIn have a lot of requests for connections. So if they are particularly strategic with who they connect with on LinkedIn, they're going to be passing by folks that they don't remember, that they don't know. So when you click to send that personal message and you make it relevant and you jog their memory about who you are, it's more likely that they are going to connect with you and do it sooner. So just always send a personal note because it matters. The last thing that I wanted to say is that we are going to continue this conversation around LinkedIn um, because our alumni are requesting it. They're interested in LinkedIn. We're building our LinkedIn Ignite page, so it's Ignite National Network, and it's separate from our national page. So make sure you join our, again, that's Ignite National Group. And stay tuned because in November we're going to do part 2 of this series and we're going to talk about beyond the base. There's a lot of stuff that we didn't cover tonight. I mean, we simply don't have time just in 1 hour. But Mia Murick, one of our other alumni, is going to come in and teach all about going beyond the basics and employing strategies to optimize your profile. As you can see, there is a banner at the top of the screen right now that says Join the Alumni Network. And I encourage you to do that because it keeps you in the loop of all of our events, social events, online events, conferences. If you complete that form that takes less than 2 or 3 minutes, you will be plugged in and you'll get all the latest information. And I think, Cecilia, unless you have anything else, I think that that covers it.
I think that's everything. I just want to reiterate, feel free to reach out to either of us and definitely send us a LinkedIn invite. And I just wanted to also, touch base on what Whitney said about LinkedIn does this great job of populating things automatically for you, but that's just a way of kind of reminding you to do something. So you don't actually want to use that text that it sends for you. You want to personally type out something. And then oftentimes, whenever I mentioned earlier about congratulating people on different career jobs that they might have, you want to definitely be sure to type something out that's personal and not use the automatic populated question. So that's just a way of LinkedIn reminding you that this resource is to build on relationships, not just so much to have them, which is why it stresses over and over again quality over quantity. So, those connections that you build with people on LinkedIn need to be authentic and they need to be one on one personal messages that you're relaying to them. So that way they can be honest and speak highly about you. And they can always think of you whenever they're trying to fill a position or when someone asks for a reference. So just use it as a reminder whenever it tells you to connect with someone, not so much as just like sending it with that automated populated message, just so that way you can kind of get into the habit of personally typing stuff out and reaching out to people on a one-to-one basis. Because overall, it's a great resource, but only if you use it the way it should be used, and that means making sure that you are building relationships on it and building that quality, so that way you're able to kind of like have authentic relationships with people. But that's it for me. Thank you so much again for everyone who tuned in, and thank you to those who will be watching it later on YouTube. I love being a part of this, and I love talking about LinkedIn, and I'm so excited to attend Mia's webinar and see what else she has to share with us.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Cecilia, and to everybody watching. I hope you go out and connect with us on LinkedIn and reach out if you have any questions. Take care.